The wind off the Atlantic that night smelled like salt and rust, and something underneath it, something mineral and cold, that the fishing crews who worked that stretch of the Maine coast described for years afterward as the smell of a place where the air has been holding its breath. It was 11:47 p.m. on the 14th of October 1972, and the last confirmed human communication from Harwick Point Lighthouse was a routine weather report filed by keeper Gerald Aldous Fenn through the coastal station radio relay at Penobscot Bay. The report noted wind speed of 18 knots from the northeast, visibility of roughly 4 miles, a minor swell from a low-pressure system moving up from the Carolinas, and no vessels in distress within the station's operational range. The transmission lasted 40 seconds. Fenn's voice, preserved in the original reel-to-reel archive maintained by the United States Coast Guard Historical Division in Washington, is calm and specific and entirely without any quality that might suggest a man who understood what was about to happen to him. He says goodnight to the relay operator, a woman named Doris Henley, who worked the Penobscot station for 11 years, and who would later say that she replayed that 40-second recording more times than she could count, not because there was anything wrong with it, but because she could not stop trying to hear whatever it was that she had missed. By the time the first boat touched the dock at Harwick Point at 4:58 in the morning, the lighthouse was doing exactly what it was built to do. The light was turning. It had not stopped. It has not stopped since. What they found when they climbed the dock stairs was not chaos. There was no overturned furniture. There was no sign of struggle, no broken glass, no indication of forced entry or desperate exit. The keeper's log was open on the desk in the watchroom, and the last entry, written in Gerald Fenn's careful left slanting handwriting with the blue ink he used exclusively because he believed black ink degraded faster in the salt air, was dated October 14, 1972, time-stamped at 11:31 p.m. The entry described routine conditions. It noted that the fourth-order Fresnel lens had been cleaned that afternoon and was operating at full efficiency. It noted that provisions were adequate through the scheduled supply run on the 19th. It noted, in the same unhurried sentence structure as every other entry across 18 months of logs, that there had been an unusual sound from the rocks below the tower at approximately 9 p.m., which Fenn described as resembling the sound of many voices speaking at the same register simultaneously, but which he attributed to the particular way the northeast wind moved through the granite formations at the base of the point. He had noted similar sounds before, he wrote. He expected it would pass. The log ended there. The pen was still in the groove of the binding, as if set down with the intention of picking it up again in a matter of moments. There are questions that stay with you after you learn enough about a case like this. Not the big obvious questions, but the small precise ones that accumulate like sediment in the quieter hours. You have maybe had one of those questions for a long time, something you read once that did not resolve the way it should, that left a residue. This story is full of those, and if you stay with it all the way to the end, you will find that the residue has a shape. The light was turning. That is where this begins and where it will end, because that single fact is not merely a detail. It is the whole architecture of what makes this case different from every other disappearance in the recorded history of the United States Coast Guard. A fourth-order Fresnel lens of the type installed at Harwick Point in 1931 requires continuous monitoring of the electric motor that drives its rotation. It requires someone to notice when the beam drifts and correct it. It requires, at minimum, a human presence in the tower aware enough to respond if something fails. On the morning of October 15, 1972, there was no human presence in that tower that any investigator could identify or account for, and the light kept turning with a precision the Coast Guard inspection team documented as within acceptable operational parameters. Whatever happened to Gerald Fenn happened between 11:31 p.m. and some point before 4:58 a.m. And in that interval, something kept the light. Gerald Aldous Fenn was born on March 9, 1931, in the town of Eastport, Maine, at the easternmost point of the contiguous United States. He grew up in a house overlooking Passamaquoddy Bay, the third of 5 children of a boat carpenter and a schoolteacher who had a particular habit, described by all 3 of her surviving children in separate interviews conducted in the 1990s, of standing at the kitchen window before anyone else was awake and watching the water with an expression her children found impossible to name precisely, but which the oldest, a woman named Carol Fenn Strachan, described in her 1994 recorded interview as the face of someone waiting for something they are not sure they want to arrive. Gerald inherited something of that quality. He was a quiet man, economical with words in the way that people who spend long stretches alone often become without noticing the change in themselves. He had served in the Navy between 1951 and 1955 aboard a destroyer escort in the North Atlantic, and the experience had given him both a functional relationship with isolation and a specific fluency with radio equipment that made him a natural candidate for Lighthouse work when he applied to the Coast Guard Auxiliary Program in 1969. His application file, available in redacted form under FOIA request number FOIA 1CG11988-047, describes him as meticulous, self-sufficient, and temperamentally suited to extended solitary assignment. He arrived at Harwick Point on April 19, 1971, with 2 duffel bags, a crate of books, a portable shortwave radio, and a brass sextant that had belonged to his father and that he used, according to his personal correspondence, not for navigation, but simply because he liked the weight of it in his hands when he was thinking. Harwick Point Lighthouse was built in 1889 on a granite promontory approximately 3 miles north of the town of Harwick, Maine, commissioned in response to a series of shipwrecks that had claimed 47 lives along that stretch of coast in the preceding decade. The tower was 64 feet of white-painted granite with an attached keeper's dwelling of 2 stories, 4 rooms, and a cellar blasted directly into the bedrock of the point. The cellar was unusual in that it connected through a narrow passage to a natural cave in the granite extending approximately 30 feet beneath the surface, before ending in a wall of solid rock. The passage was gated with a heavy iron door installed during original construction, and the key to the padlock securing that door was on the ring of keys found hanging on the hook beside the watchroom desk when the relief crew arrived on the morning of October 15th. The gate was locked. The passage beyond it was dry, and yet the cave at the end of that passage, when it was finally entered in the first week of November 1972 by a Coast Guard investigative team accompanied by a geologist from the University of Maine named Dr. Patricia Wohl, contained something that the investigative report, available under case file number CGI 1NE 1972-114, describes with a restraint that reads, "Across the distance of 5 decades, as the restraint of people who did not have the language for what they were looking at. What the team found was not a body. It was not equipment. It was a formation on the cave wall that Dr. Wohl could not attribute to any known geological process, consisting of marks pressed into the granite at a depth of approximately 1 centimeter, covering an area of roughly 4 feet by 6 feet on the north-facing wall. The marks did not correspond to tool marks of any conventional type. She estimated the oldest were at least several hundred years old based on weathering patterns. She also noted, in a passage that was crossed out in her draft and then restored in the final document in a different pen, suggesting it was added after initial submission, that the arrangement of the marks produced in her when she stood at a specific distance and allowed her eyes to unfocus slightly the distinct impression of a grid, something with columns and rows, something that had been used to record and organize information over a very long time. She emphasized this was a perceptual impression only. She could not characterize it further without risking the integrity of the report. The passage ends there. The town of Harwick had a complicated relationship with the lighthouse long before Gerald Fenn arrived. The stories specific to Harwick Point had a consistency that separated them from ordinary local legend. They were not stories about ghosts in any traditional sense. They were more precise than that, and more unsettling because of their precision. The oldest documented account, recorded in the diary of a fisherman named Silas Crane, dating to December of 1903, described a night when Crane had been caught in a sudden storm 3 miles offshore and had navigated home by the light from the point, as he had done dozens of times before. What was different about that night, he wrote, was that the light seemed wrong in a way he could not explain technically. The rotation was correct, the color was correct, the intensity was correct. But something about the quality of the light made him feel, with a certainty he found disturbing in a man of his practical temperament, that the light was not showing him where to go. It was showing him where it knew he was. A local history of Harwick, published in 1931 by a woman named Agnes Tremblay Holt, compiled 17 separate accounts from fishermen, coastal surveyors, and summer visitors between 1889 and 1929, all describing variations of the same experience Crane had documented. The light was behaving as a light should behave. Everything about it was technically correct, and yet the people who encountered it on the water at certain hours, primarily between 11 at night and 3 in the morning in the autumn months, described a subjective quality they struggled to put into ordinary language. It was watching. It was aware. It was not merely marking the location of the rocks. It was registering the location of the people. Agnes Holt was careful to note that she presented these accounts not as supernatural evidence, but because they were consistent across witnesses who had no contact with one another across a span of 40 years, and because she believed consistency of that kind deserved documentation even when it resisted explanation. Gerald Fenn had read Agnes Holt's book. A copy of the 1931 first edition, borrowed from the Harwick Town Library on September 6, 1972, 5 weeks before his disappearance, was found on the shelf above his desk. There are pencil marks in the margins of the Lighthouse chapter, very faint and careful, the kind a person makes when marking something for later reference. 2 passages are marked. The first is a sentence from the account of a Captain Morse, dated to April of 1917. The light knows what it is looking for, and it is patient in the way that only a thing without time to spend can be patient. The second marked passage is Holt's footnote about a retired keeper who had served at the point from 1904 to 1911 and who had described waking at midnight to find the watchroom filled with a quality of light that was not coming from the lens. The lens was turning, as it always turned. But there was another light, lower, closer, the color of water seen from below the surface, and in that light the keeper said he had seen, or believed he had seen, or experienced in some way that he refused to call seeing, because it was more like remembering something he had never known, the outlines of figures standing in the watchroom, not threatening, not moving, simply present in the way that furniture is present, with the quality of having been there for a very long time and expecting to continue. The pencil mark beside that passage was different from the others. It was not a line. It was a small question mark, very carefully drawn, placed not at the end of the passage but at the beginning, as if Fenn had needed a moment before going further. If you are watching this and something about this story is pulling at something you have been carrying for a while, leave a comment below. Copy and paste this if it fits. I came back to this story more than once, because the people watching with you right now are feeling exactly the same thing, and knowing that matters. The Coast Guard investigative team documented 37 personal items belonging to Gerald Fenn in the keeper's dwelling. His books were on the shelf above the desk, alphabetized by author. His portable shortwave radio was on the kitchen table, tuned to a frequency the investigating officer noted was not a standard commercial or emergency band, recorded in the report as 6.975 megahertz. His brass sextant was on the windowsill of the bedroom, positioned with the lens facing the open Atlantic. His logbook was open on the watchroom desk, with the pen in the groove of the binding. His coffee mug was on the railing of the exterior catwalk that circled the tower at the 40-foot level, found by a member of the relief crew before the investigative team arrived. The mug contained a small amount of liquid described in the report as cold but not evaporated, consistent with having been poured within the previous 4 to 6 hours. The mug was positioned with its handle turned outward toward the water, as if whoever had set it there had been looking at the ocean rather than at the door they would use to go back inside. There was no other evidence of where Gerald Fenn had gone. There was no evidence he had gone into the water. There was simply the lighthouse, and the light turning, and the mug on the railing with the handle facing the Atlantic, and the open logbook, and the question mark in pencil beside a passage about figures made of light standing in a room that should have been empty. The relief keeper assigned to Harwick Point following Fenn's disappearance was a man named Thomas Vesey, 51 years old, a 20-year veteran of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. He arrived on November 3, 1972, and remained for 47 days. His departure was not a scheduled rotation. He requested emergency relief on December 18th by radio, a request the duty officer at Penobscot Station logged as follows: Keeper Vesey reporting personal medical emergency, requesting immediate replacement, refusing to elaborate. Voice described as controlled, but with quality of significant distress. When the replacement arrived the following morning, Thomas Vesey was standing on the dock with his bags already packed. He did not go back inside the lighthouse. He did not speak about Harwick Point publicly for 11 years. When he did speak, it was in a letter to the editor of a maritime history journal called Coastal Record, published in the spring of 1983. He wrote that he had not departed due to any medical emergency, and had filed the request in those terms because he could not file it in accurate terms without being dismissed. He described a progressive difficulty with the nights at the station, not the isolation which he was accustomed to, but something he called a thickness in the hours between midnight and 3 a.m., a feeling that the station itself was oriented toward something during those hours in the way that a face is oriented toward whoever it is looking at. He wrote that on his final night he had climbed to the watchroom at approximately 1 a.m. to check the lens mechanism and had found the watchroom occupied. He used that word specifically. He did not elaborate on it further. Thomas Vesey died in 1991. His daughter confirmed in correspondence with researcher Howard Ballard in 2005 that her father had never returned to Harwick Point after December 1972 and had never, in her presence, spoken the name of the lighthouse again after 1983. She said the absence of the subject from his conversation was total and deliberate in a way that communicated its own meaning without requiring words. The question of what maintained the light during the hours of Fenn's disappearance has never been satisfactorily resolved. The mechanical explanation is straightforward on its surface. The electric motor was designed to run continuously with only periodic human supervision, and 47 minutes between Fenn's last log entry and the period the relief crew documented the light functioning normally is within the motor's unattended operational range. But the mechanical explanation does not account for what Chief Warrant Officer Dennis Albright documented in his preliminary report, filed on the morning of October 15th. Albright noted that the lens was not merely turning, it had been adjusted. The azimuth of the beam had been altered from its standard setting by approximately 2 degrees to the north, a change small enough to be invisible from shore, but significant enough that Albright, who had worked with fourth-order Fresnel optics throughout his career, noticed it immediately upon entering the watchroom. The adjustment was technically precise. The adjustment was also, in Albright's assessment, purposeful. The 2-degree northward shift directed the beam toward a specific patch of open water approximately 4 miles offshore, where a submerged ledge system created navigational hazards at certain tide stages. There was nothing at that location on the night of October 14th. No vessel in distress, nothing that would explain why the beam had been pointed there, and nothing that explained who had pointed it. The theory that Fenn had made the adjustment himself before whatever happened to him happened is not impossible, but it requires accepting that he had then returned to the watchroom desk, made his final log entry in a hand showing no sign of agitation, replaced the pen in the groove of the binding, and proceeded to wherever he went without recording the adjustment in the log, which was contrary to every established protocol for lens modifications and contrary to every entry in 18 months of consistent record-keeping. The theory that someone else made the adjustment requires accepting that a person with technical knowledge sufficient to perform a precise Fresnel lens calibration was present at the station, left no trace of their presence, and chose not to report themselves to any authority. Neither explanation is satisfactory. Both are the only explanations available within the range of what is conventionally considered possible. Howard Ballard, whose unfinished documentary research on Harwick Point represents the most comprehensive single attempt to organize the available evidence, spent 3 weeks in the spring of 2005 in Harwick conducting interviews with older residents. 14 conversations are documented in transcripts held by his daughter, Karen Ballard, at the Maine Maritime Museum's Oral History Program. 2 of those conversations are different in kind from the others, and both concern the same person. A woman named Vera Ouellet, who was 81 years old in 2005 and who had lived within sight of the lighthouse for her entire life, told Ballard that Gerald Fenn had come to her door in September of 1972, 6 weeks before he disappeared, and asked if he could sit with her and ask some questions. She had let him in, made him tea, and listened. He wanted to know about the sounds from the rocks. He described them the same way he had described them in his log, voices at the same register, and asked if she had ever heard anything like that from her property. She told him she had heard it her whole life, that her father had heard it before her, and that it had never frightened her because it was consistent, and because things that are consistent are simply the nature of a place and not a threat. He asked if she knew what caused it. She told him she did not know and had never felt the need to know. She told him that some things about a place are its business and not yours. He asked her, after a pause, if she had ever heard the voices say anything she could understand. She looked at him, she told Ballard. The way you look at someone standing at the edge of a place they should not be standing, and she told him no. In the second recorded conversation, which Vera herself had requested through a note left at Ballard's lodgings 2 days after the first, she told him there was something she had not said to Fenn because she had not known him well enough then, and that she had regretted not saying it since the morning she heard he was gone. The sounds from the rocks had changed in the autumn of 1972, beginning sometime in late August or early September, concurrent with Fenn's arrival at her door. They had not gotten louder or more frequent. The change was in direction, as if the sounds, which had always seemed to come from somewhere below the rocks and move outward toward the water, had turned, were coming from somewhere different, were oriented, as she put it, toward the tower. She had not told Fenn because she had not wanted to frighten him, and because she had told herself it was nothing. She told Howard Ballard, at 81 years old, on a recording in a maritime museum archive in Bath, Maine, that she still was not sure whether it was something or nothing, but that she had thought about it in the 33 years between October 1972 and the spring morning when she finally said it out loud to a stranger in her kitchen, more times than she could count. If you have stayed with this story this far, you already understand why this channel exists. Hit the like. It tells the algorithm that stories told this carefully deserve to reach more people who need them. The lighthouse at Harwick Point was automated in November of 1988, 16 years after Gerald Fenn's disappearance, as part of a nationwide Coast Guard program decommissioning the last staffed lighthouses in the continental United States. The decision to automate was preceded, according to internal Coast Guard records obtained by Howard Ballard, by an unusual volume of requests for early relief from the station. 13 separate requests in those 16 years, a rate the records indicate was the highest per-keeper average of any continuously staffed station in the 1st District over that period. The reasons given were varied: personal health matters, family emergencies, unspecified psychological difficulties, once a report of equipment malfunction that subsequent inspection found to be non-existent. None of the keepers who requested early relief were disciplined or subject to fitness evaluations producing formal findings. One internal memo dated April 1979, signed by a district commander whose name is redacted, states that the operational priority of the station requires continuity of presence and that individual personnel matters should be managed with that priority in mind. The memo does not say what it means by individual personnel matters. It does not need to. After automation, the station was maintained on a periodic schedule by the 1st District's aides to navigation team out of South Portland. The maintenance logs from 1988 onward are entirely routine. They show a lighthouse operating exactly as designed. They show a light turning. The only entry in 23 years of automated logs that departs from standard technical language appears in the record from the November 2001 visit, in a brief note appended below the signature of lead maintenance technician Robert Caruso. The note reads, "Recommend interior inspection of cellar passage. Source of sound not identified." The subsequent visit in February 2002 contains no record of an interior cellar inspection having been conducted. Caruso left the aides to navigation team in March 2002, transferring to a shore facilities posting in New Hampshire. A request by Karen Ballard in 2019 for any record of follow-up to Caruso's notation was answered by the District Records Office with a response stating that no record of the notation could be located in the archived version of the November 2001 maintenance log, that the copy in her possession appeared to be a draft rather than the official filed record, and that the official filed record showed no anomalous entries for that date. Karen Ballard's copy, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, filed in 2015, has Caruso's note written in the same ink and the same pen stroke as the rest of the document. It is not a later addition. It is part of the original text. The investigation into Gerald Fenn's disappearance was officially closed in April of 1973 with a determination of accidental death by drowning, a finding the report's own authors described as presumptive in the absence of physical evidence, meaning no body was ever recovered, no physical evidence of drowning or any other cause of death was found, and the determination was made on the basis of eliminating other explanations rather than on any positive evidence for what had actually occurred. The report satisfied the legal standard. It closed the case. It did not explain anything. A woman named Sylvia Chen completed a graduate thesis at the University of Maine in 2017 on anomalous disappearances in coastal New England between 1900 and 2000, including Harwick Point as one of 6 case studies. Her section on Fenn's disappearance runs to 40 pages and represents the most methodologically rigorous academic treatment of the case available. It ends with a passage that her thesis committee apparently asked her to revise, but that she retained in the final submitted version. She wrote that the difficulty with Harwick Point, as with all cases of this type, was not the absence of evidence, but the presence of evidence that produced a coherent pattern, pointing toward a conclusion that no academic institution was prepared to support, and that she was not prepared to state outright, because stating it outright would require her to claim knowledge she did not have. She wrote that she could say, with confidence proportional to the evidence available, that Harwick Point Lighthouse had for at least 130 years operated as a location where the normal relationship between presence and absence, between arriving and departing, between time as experienced inside the station and time as experienced outside it, functioned according to rules that were consistent, but not the rules she had grown up using. She wrote that whatever Gerald Fenn encountered in those hours between 11:31 p.m. and 4:58 a.m., it was not random, not accidental, and not without precedent. It was, in her careful and precisely chosen word, expected. The light at Harwick Point rotates once every 4 seconds. It has rotated once every 4 seconds without interruption for more than 50 years since the night Gerald Fenn set his coffee mug on the catwalk railing with the handle toward the Atlantic and did not come back for it. The light does not know it has been seen. It does not know it is being talked about right now. It does not know that somewhere, in a room with the curtains drawn against the dark outside, you are watching a video about it, following the beam with your eyes the way Silas Crane followed it across the water in December of 1903, the way Gerald Fenn followed it across 18 months of careful log entries, the way Thomas Vesey followed it in thought for 19 years after the night the watchroom was occupied, in a way he would not describe. The light does not know any of this. Or if it does, and the accumulated weight of what people at that point have documented across 130 years suggests that whatever operates there is not indifferent to the people who notice it, then it has been watching back this entire time. Patient in the way that only a thing without time to spend can afford to be patient. Waiting in the way that a place waits when it has learned, over a very long time, that people always come back to it eventually, whether they mean to or not, and where a pen remains in the groove of a logbook binding set down by someone who intended to pick it up again, who has not returned for it in 50 years, not yet, with the light still turning and the handle of the mug still facing the water, at least in the way the place remembers it, which may be the only way that counts. The most recent documented visit to Harwick Point, conducted by the Aids to Navigation team in September of 2022, is a routine maintenance log. It records the condition of the light mechanism, the state of structural elements, the need for repainting of the iron railing on the exterior catwalk. It records nothing unusual, but appended to the log in the section marked Additional Observations, there is a note submitted by the junior technician on the team, a woman for whom the Harwick Point visit was her second assignment. The note says that during the inspection of the watchroom at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, on a clear September day with no weather anomaly of any kind, she noticed that the coffee mug displayed in the preservation case on the watchroom desk, the mug recovered from the catwalk railing on the morning of October 15, 1972, was warm. She described pressing her fingers against the outside of the glass and then, after a moment, opening the case and placing her hand directly against the ceramic. Warm, she wrote, in the way that something is warm when it has recently been held. Not ambient temperature, not sunlight through glass. She noted the observation not because she expected it to be taken seriously, but because she was the kind of person who believed accurate documentation was worth doing even when, especially when, no one would believe you. The note is in the official record. The record is available. The mug is in its case. The light is turning. Someone, at some point, was holding it. If this story stayed with you, if you find yourself going back to a particular detail, trying to find the place where it stops making sense or the place where it makes too much sense, you already know why this channel exists. Leave a like, subscribe if you are not already here, and come back next week because the next case begins with a photograph taken in a town on the Oregon coast in 1958, and in every image, in every single one, there is a figure at the edge of the frame that no one put there. The light is still turning. It has never stopped. If these stories find you the way they find most people who end up here, quietly, at night, through a recommendation that felt less like an algorithm and more like something knowing where to look, then this channel is already yours. Unresolved exists because there are questions that do not resolve and because you deserve to sit with them in the company of people who take them as seriously as you do. We do not offer easy answers. We offer careful attention, the kind that a story like Gerald Fenn's has been waiting a long time for someone to pay. Subscribe if you have not. Come back next week. The people who watch these videos do not do it passively. They carry the stories with them, the way Vera Willette carried the memory of what she did not say to a man who came to her door one September afternoon and asked the right questions a few weeks too late. You are not watching alone. You never were. Something about this case gets under your skin in a specific way, and if you are honest with yourself, you already know what it is. Leave a comment below. You can copy and paste this exactly if it says what you feel. I came back to this story more than once, because the people watching this right now are sitting with the same thing you are sitting with, and when you leave that comment, you are leaving it for them too, not just for the channel. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do for a stranger is prove to them that they are not the only one who cannot let something go.